So today, as part of my series on Yoga Nidra, I'm interviewing Elena Mironov. You may not know her face, but if you're a fan of Yoga Nidra, you've probably heard her voice because her meditations have been watched by millions of people on YouTube and listened to on Spotify and Apple Music. But she's not just a yoga teacher, she's also a psychologist and a musician. And we talk about how she uses her practice with her clients. We get into loads of detail about the research behind Yoga Nidra, what's so mysterious about it, why is it so different from other kinds of meditation. Also some tips there on sankalpa, setting your intention or resolve. So yeah, really interesting video packed with knowledge, such a knowledgeable person. I really hope you enjoy hearing what Elena has to say. If you do, please do drop a like, let me know what you think in the comments, and if you're a fan of Yoga Nidra, do definitely subscribe to the channel because I've got videos coming up with Tracy Stanley and Charlie Morley, two experts in Yoga Nidra. So yeah, enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me today. Your meditations, I found them really useful last year when I was really struggling to sleep, and I used in particular your calm one, which I'll share at the end of this video where people could go and listen to that. So it's a real pleasure to have you on the channel.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for your words. It's really warming my heart to hear that what I've created has been useful, especially going through some of the challenging parts of the COVID situation, when you're stuck at home and you really need to take care of your nervous system. I think Yoga Nidra can be such a help for that. So we're really grateful that my work has been useful.
So you're really famous for mainly your Yoga Nidra practices. You are obviously a psychologist and a musician as well on the side. But what is it that makes Yoga Nidra so unique?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think that obviously, like, we don't come to, we don't become teachers of Yoga Nidra for no reason. I think that all of us teachers have our own stories and our own personal experiences that spark interest in traditions like this, and eventually just to become teachers. So obviously, there's a story underneath that I'm going to share with you later. But more than anything, I guess I'm a believer in Yoga Nidra because it's such a simple and such an accessible and such a powerful technique that just works every time. And after having observed thousands of people feeling so different, so much better following the practice in real life, and then having created recordings that serve people online, I'm more and more of a believer. I just think that this is a practice that makes such a big difference and such a necessary companion for modern life. I think that even though it's an ancient practice, it's something that is just as relevant nowadays, if not more relevant, taking into account the pace of life and how stressed a lot of us tend to get on a daily basis. It's just such a great way to offset the anxiety and stress of modern life.
And for people who are coming to this maybe not knowing that much about Yoga Nidra, what is it that makes it Yoga Nidra? Because there's obviously some similarities between it and maybe something like mindfulness, which a lot of people have tried now, but we've got the body scanning and breath awareness. What is it that makes Yoga Nidra Yoga Nidra?
Well, if you're completely new to this, Yoga Nidra actually means yoga sleep. So it's a meditation that takes you into this interesting place that many describe as being suspended between wakefulness and sleep. So it just feels like a really magical place to experience for many. But ultimately, what we're trying to attain in the practice of Yoga Nidra is a way to rest very deeply while at the same time maintaining a state of conscious awareness. So it's a coexistence of deep rest and conscious awareness. And obviously it doesn't mean that it's going to happen that way from the first try of Yoga Nidra. You might just fall asleep if you're really exhausted and it's perfect. Or you might stay awake the whole time, and that's completely fine as well. It's still getting a lot of benefits. But ultimately we're trying to train our minds to be able to experience a state of very, very deep rest. It's an extremely restorative practice. At the same time, maintain our awareness. But there's so many ways to describe Yoga Nidra that I wouldn't even know where to start. I think that the best way is actually to experience that for yourself and to see how your own body and your own mind receives this amazing experience that it is, in a way. It's not necessarily a meditation as we know it, even though it does share some components with mindfulness and with other meditation traditions. But sometimes I'm not even sure whether we can define Yoga Nidra as meditation, because there are so many differences and because of how different it feels compared to other styles of meditation for many practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting that you say that, because I remember the first time I ever did a yoga nidra, coming out of it like, whoa, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's so similar to other kinds of prompts you might receive when being guided in a meditation, there is this completely different effect, and it's like almost like a mystery to me. Like,
Yeah.
why does it have that different effect? So, yeah, it's really interesting that even you yourself are like, I don't know if we can even just describe it as meditation. So,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it does share some of the common points with meditation practice as we know it. But how do you, like Tom, how would you define meditation? Just meditation. What would be your definition of meditation practice?
oh, that's so tough, isn't it? Because I came to meditation through yoga initially, and then for me personally, mindfulness felt like a much more kind of condensed version of what I was getting through some of that I didn't necessarily have to do on a yoga mat. So then I became kind of obsessed with mindfulness meditation. Um, and then since then, I've got much more deeply into breath work. And
Mm.
because of how it enhanced my mindfulness practice. And so it's like, I mean, what is meditation? It's really tough, because if you ask a mindfulness teacher, they're going to give you a really different answer
Mm.
to a breathwork teacher to a. So yeah, it's tough. I think that obviously mindfulness is being present, being
Mm.
aware of the present, being curious about what's actually happening, having that element of embodiment, all of that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, you've opened a can of worms. I
Mhm.
study philosophy, and so I can't help but like go off onto like, how are we even defining this and that, and can never find the right answers for those things. But I'm kind of comfortable in that zone, because in philosophy, you when you first start studying it, you're like, yeah, what's the answer? And then
Mm.
by the end, you're like, okay, yeah, another thing that there's no real answer for, but we
Exactly.
can still talk about it a lot and still get something out of it.
So a lot of the time when people try to define meditation, they say like either it's one pointed focus,
Mm,
which you could agree with or disagree with, because there are some meditations that actually are taking us into a state of open-minded awareness as opposed to focusing all of our attention on one point.
yeah.
Or whether focusing all of our attention on breath, which is also a little bit like focusing on one point. So Yoga Nidra does have some of those components of one focused attention. So there are some points where it overlaps with meditation if you define it that way. But actually, I think meditation is a much bigger thing than just one pointed awareness. Some dictionaries define that as a mental exercise. So if we define it that way, then I guess Yoga Nidra could fall in this category to some degree. But on the other hand, it's also a practice of undoing. So if Yoga Nidra is a practice of undoing, then how can we call it a technique or an exercise, right? So it's also a little bit controversial.
Mm,
But I guess for me as a psychologist, the interesting thing is that Yoga Nidra tends to produce a very different brainwave pattern compared to many other styles of meditation. And from that perspective, I guess it also sets it apart from many other ways of meditating. The brainwave pattern tends to go into high frequency brainwaves like gamma waves, for instance, in many styles of meditation like metta. There was a lot of very experienced practitioners studied in the West in the past few decades, and it really shows the predominance of very high frequency brainwaves. But when you look at the practitioners of Yoga Nidra, especially like really, really experienced ones, and at their brainwave patterns, it actually tends to go the opposite way. So from the beta brainwaves that tend to be predominant in the day-to-day life, it tends to drop. So it goes down a step into alpha brainwaves, which I associated with having our eyes closed and just trying to relax, like disconnecting from the visual stimuli. Then they will tend to drop even deeper into theta brain waves, which are associated with light sleep, depending on the a kind of theta, or even deep sleep. And then sometimes they can drop even deeper than that. There's actually been a study back in 1970s that demonstrated that a Swami was able to go all the way into delta brainwave predominance and at the same time remain aware and awake while practicing Yoga Nidra. So it's actually really, really fascinating that that the brainwave signature tends to be actually quite different from other styles of meditation as well.
And so if we're getting into those theta waves, for example, which is seems to be very achievable from what I've read for most people, not necessarily we're all going to get into that delta style. But if we're getting there, what's the benefit of that in terms? Is it just the relaxation, or is there something deeper on a psychological?
That's a great question. Obviously, relaxation is a big part of that, and that's important. And for many people who are really, really stressed, sometimes even just the relaxation component seems unattainable. And this is where Yoga Nidra comes in. It can really show us the way into that state of deep relaxation. But there's much more to that than just the state of relaxation. Actually, in the theta predominant brainwave states, we tend to consolidate the information that we'll learn throughout the day. So it's really important to be able to experience that both during our sleep. So when we are not good sleepers, we tend to experience less of deep or slow frequency theta brain waves, and sometimes we don't go into delta sleep at all. So it's important to sleep well. I'm not saying that Yoga Nidra excludes healthy sleep, but still just as relevant. But Yoga Nidra can help us boost the time that we spend in the theta brainwave predominance, enhancing our learning capacity, really enhancing our memory. And actually, when it comes to learning, it's not just the learning of factual information, but it's also muscular memory. It's many different aspects of short-term and long-term memory that we can improve. And also, it really resets the brain. Delta brainwave would probably be the ultimate state where the brain can get a proper reset, but already in the theta predominant brainwave state, we are experiencing a lot of, or the body is going through a lot of processes that are necessary for repairing our systems and resetting the brain.
Yeah, so it's a real deep process then, by the sounds of it. So in terms of, you've mentioned that you're a psychologist. Do you use this as a practice with your clients as a psychologist?
Yes, I do actually, yes. And I do that on a regular basis. I primarily work with people who are in a state of crisis. So it's both people who have a psychiatric diagnosis or who have some very serious psychological challenges. So it's quite a wide range of different people with very different challenges that I work with on a daily basis. And I started to integrate Yoga Nidra years ago, and it was both coming from a place to share something that really worked for me, but also it's an ongoing experiment. I'm really curious to see how people respond to this. I'm really interested in observing the effects of Yoga Nidra on a day-to-day basis. I love the research. I love reading research. I love diving deep into the newest studies done in Yoga Nidra, but nothing substitutes being able to actually see how it works on real people every single day, see the actual effects of Yoga Nidra, in particular when it comes to my clients who are going through a crisis, And I was always very skeptical about the effectiveness of this type of techniques on people who are going through a crisis, but now it's really, really clear that it does do something incredible to their bodies and their minds.
So your practice and your way of teaching and has really been developed almost in the field as a psychologist by the sounds of it. And that's kind of one thing that I wanted to ask you. I know you teach teachers how to teach this, and there's quite a few yoga teachers who watch the videos on this channel. I just wondered, if there's a teacher out there who's wanting to begin to teach Yoga Nidra, is it as simple as just reading a script or learning a script, or is there room for creativity? Is this more of an art form than a sort of prescribed thing? What are your views on that?
Well, I do know that there are teachers who are trained yoga teachers, but they have no idea about Yoga Nidra. They just know that this is a practice they enjoy themselves, and they find a script on the internet and they go ahead and start teaching. That's one way of doing this, but I don't think that it's necessarily the most informed way of doing this. And it's a technique that looks very, very simple on the outside, but there's so much going on under the surface. It's like the tip of the iceberg. The script that we find on the internet is like the tip of the iceberg. But it's nice to know what's going on underwater. Like, it's nice to know what's going on in the psyche of the person that they're working with. And it's also really important to know what to be prepared for, like what can happen. What can be the effect of Yoga Nidra when a person doesn't emerge from this practice feeling blissed out? You know, sometimes this can also be a practice that that makes a person really sad because they're starting to process things that they have been storing away for a really long time, or repressing or blocking for a really long time. And all of a sudden they get this shortcut access to the depths of their unconscious and subconscious minds. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of the memories, a lot of the old emotions begin to surface. So it's nice to know what can happen. It's nice to know how to hold space for those who are suffering from trauma or anxiety or stress disorder. You know, sometimes people come to the yoga space or to practice Yoga Nidra with a lot of baggage, and if we're not prepared to handle what might happen as a result of this practice, because we are actually taking people really, really deep to their own minds.
That's
And
thank you for saying that, because that's nice for people to know,
yeah,
who are maybe going to try Yoga Nidra, or they've been trying Yoga Nidra, that it's not, they're not doing it wrong or anything if they're not feeling blissed out. That maybe even that's working for them, that's what that is them doing it right, that's actually unlocking some parts of themselves that
exactly.
need to be breathed or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very difficult to do it wrong, but you have to be prepared for what might happen. And it's nice to have a teacher knowing about the potential consequences of practicing Yoga Nidra. It's nice to have a teacher who's aware of its effects on our minds and our bodies and the nervous system and the brain. It's nice to feel safe knowing that your guide, knowing that your teacher is trained and informed, and also perhaps as an extra bonus knows how to adapt the practice or customize the practice to my needs as a student, for instance. So there's so many ways in which, if you know what you're doing, you can make a practice or create a practice that is particularly effective for anxiety. Or you can begin to craft a script, get guidance in my training courses of how to create scripts for stress disorder, for burnout, for trauma, this for insomnia. There's so many ways in which you can use Yoga Nidra, but you need a little bit more understanding than what you get by just downloading the script online and reading this. And it's also nice to not have to read it, but know how to structure that in your head and how to create the scripts and how to memorize them, so that you don't have to depend on a cheat sheet or having to bring a phone with you so that you can read it off of your phone. And this is something that I really love sharing with my teacher trainees.
Ah, brilliant. Yeah. I mean, do you think that it will change in the future as the studies come out? Will we be changing how we're doing Yoga Nidra? Or do you just think that this is just the evidence showing, yes, this is working, this is how we should be doing it?
Actually, I think that it is already changing a lot. And there are some teachers who are creating their very own protocol. For example, if you look at what Richard Miller is doing with iRest, he's creating a whole new protocol of teaching Yoga Nidra to PTSD sufferers and people with very special needs. And another new development is that for the longest time, Yoga Nidra was used as a practice that told practitioners to stay aware and awake the whole time. But now we have some evidence that it is a very effective way of dealing with insomnia. And therefore, the practice is now being adapted to this whole new situation where it's used as a sleep-inducing practice. It wasn't really the case a few decades ago at all. So there are so many new developments, and the research that is coming out in the field of Yoga Nidra is actually showing us the new avenues, the new ways of using this. And it's actually quite curious if you look at the roots of Yoga Nidra. Originally, it was developed as a practice of self-realization. And it's not until like a few decades later, after Swami Satchidananda Saraswati said that this is a practice that is primarily, designed as a practice of self-realization. It's not until a few decades later that using it solely as a practice of self-realization opens so many ways of using this. And and really emphasizing other benefits like the way to reset the nervous system, the way to rest deeply, the way to restore the body and the mind after a period of intense stress. So I think that this is just the beginning. I think we're beginning to scratch the surface, and there's so much coming out now. But my feeling is that this is like a box of treasures, and we are going to be continuously pulling out new things out of that box of treasures as the new research comes along. And now that there's interest of the leading neuroscientists in this method, I think that this is going to happen faster and faster. There's more and more papers coming every year.
Yeah, and it comes back to almost what we were discussing at the beginning there, between the difference between meditation, mindfulness style meditation, one pointed and all that kind of stuff, and this. It feels like there's a lot less pressure with Yoga Nidra, to actually remain present, you were saying there, is it about being awake all the time? And it's like just being allowed to drift. When I'm teaching mindfulness and people, they're kind of going, I was kind of away somewhere. Is that okay? And it's like, yeah, it is okay. And with Yoga Nidra, there's no real pressure to do that, and you're getting all of these benefits of the relaxation response, or the benefits of whatever's happening there with the memory and all the stuff that you mentioned. All those benefits about short-term memory, and so it's like, yeah, that alone is a huge benefit for this. The one thing we've not discussed is sankalpa. You speak a little bit about what is sankalpa, or what is asankalpa.
So sankalpa is one component of Yoga Nidra practice. Then in the eyes of many teachers is the defining component, or the defining element. So sankalpa is translated as resolve, resolution. Some teachers translate it as intention, which is like a more loose kind of translation, but it's also got some truth to that. So sankalpa is something that you set for yourself in the beginning of the practice, and then you revisit that at the end of the practice. And unlike setting an intention for a yoga class, where you might have a new intention every time that you practice, sankalpa is actually not supposed to change very much. So this is something that is perhaps like your biggest dream or vision that you'd really love to bring to life. Or maybe this is like a part of your own self-realization journey that is really, really important to you, that you put into words and that you use in Yoga Nidra practice. In a way, like we have a special access to the depths of our subconscious minds in Yoga Nidra. So we can plant the seed of this intention really, really, really deep. And this is what makes it even more powerful. And typically sankalpa is something that doesn't necessarily only involve us. So it doesn't have to be like an egocentric thing, but it's an intention that is bigger than us. So something that might still benefit us as an individual, but that has a much bigger effect on the benefit of all beings, or it has the benefit of all beings in mind as well, as opposed to just our own selfish interest. And this is something that makes the practice of Yoga Nidra so much bigger than just like a 20-minute yoga nap, or other things that it's sometimes called as well. It actually gives us an opportunity to not only plant the seed of our deep intention into our subconscious minds, but something that also on a very conscious level begins to steer our daily thoughts and actions. And I found this to be a very powerful way to infuse a practice of Yoga Nidra with even more meaning. And definitely something that I recommend that you don't overlook when you do your practice.
So is that because of what's happening with the short-term memory while we're in that sort of brainwave state? Is that why it helps? Why the sankalpa?
It could be, but we don't know exactly how that works. So I guess one way to explain why it's more effective than just repeating this phrase to yourself when you're not practicing is because your mind is generally much more relaxed. When we're more relaxed, we are more likely to be more receptive. This is also the principle of hypnosis, like that as the person begins to relax, it's easier to be more receptive. And that's part of the principle. But of course, there's much more to that. You are returning back to the same intention again and again and again, sometimes for years. And as you do, it definitely gains momentum, and it begins to inform your life, your daily life, when you're in a wakeful state, more and more as you go. And obviously it's okay to change your sankalpa if it's no longer relevant, or if manifested, it might take a bit of time. And sometimes in Yoga Nidra, we also begin to refine our sankalpa. It's ultimately answering the question, what do you really want? Right? Like, and for many people, when you ask them that question, they get completely confused. Like, they're not used to asking themselves this kind of question. They just operate on an autopilot a lot of the time. And I'm not judging this. This is, this is a state in which many of us operate, and that's, I guess, like part of the reality. But it's nice to be aware of your underlying deeper motivations, and it's really, really nice to use Yoga Nidra in order to understand what is it that really drives you. What is your purpose? What is the reason why you are waking up in the morning? And as you define that for yourself and then refine that over time, become even more clear about that, obviously, and that intention, that sankalpa, becomes even more powerful. And the mental states that you're going through in Yoga Nidra are a catalyst for making that work.
Yeah, Elena, thank you so much for joining me. Is there where can I direct people to find out more about everything that you're doing?
Well, if they're interested in trying out a Yoga Nidra, maybe someone is new to this, or maybe someone would like to try practicing with me, I have a free Yoga Nidra available for download on my website. So you are very welcome to enjoy that if you're listening to this right now. You can go to my website, elenamironov.com, and click on Yoga Nidra tab. You will be able to get your free recording right away. You can download it and enjoy that in high quality. And yeah, definitely stay in touch. So there are always interesting things that I'm creating, whether it's Yoga Nidra programs or teacher trainings, and it will be a pleasure to reconnect with you in that space.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
So I really hope you enjoyed hearing what Elena had to say. I'll leave a link around here in a moment to Elena leading me in a breathing practice that you can breathe along with. And I really definitely recommend you checking it out. You heard how amazing her voice is, so calming, so relaxing. It's a 10-minute practice, definitely worth your time. It's how she prepares people for Yoga Nidra. I'll leave links below to all of Elena's websites that she mentioned, so sparklingyoga.com and elenamironov.com. If you are a fan of Yoga Nidra or just interested in Yoga Nidra, then definitely consider subscribing to the channel, because I'll be speaking very soon with Tracy Stanley, who's the author of the new book Radiant Rest, which is a really beautiful book about Yoga Nidra. I'll also be speaking shortly after that with Charlie Morley, who is an expert in lucid dreaming. So we'll be talking about the crossover there between yogic sleep and lucid dreaming and Tibetan practices. Very, very interesting stuff. So definitely subscribe if that is your bag. If you're still watching this video, then thank you for making it to the end. Can I ask you to consider checking out my book, Draw Breath, The Art of Breathing. Check out the reviews on Amazon. It's a book that teaches you to meditate and teaches you simple breathwork practices through drawing. So drawing up on pink lines as you breathe in and down on blue lines as you breathe out. Super instantly relaxing, and it teaches you, each new image becomes slightly more complex, and each new image teaches you something different about the physiology, the psychology, and the philosophy of the breath, breathing, and meditation. So if meditation's your thing, definitely check that out. Also, consider dropping your email at drawbreath.com if you want to come to my on-air sessions, which are free every Friday, simple breathwork session every Friday. So if you want the email for that in your inbox, the invite in your inbox, then do drop your email at drawbreath.com, and I will see you soon.